Jefferson Robbins here with NCWLIFE TV. One man has been sheriff of Chelan County, elected in 2010, and repeatedly since then. He'd like a fourth term if the voters of Chelan County agree. I'm here with Brian Burnett. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Jefferson.
Brian, I'd like to ask you to just sort of pretend you're a new face, although you're really not, and sort of introduce yourself for the benefit of the viewers. Who are you, and why do you think this job should be in your hands for the next 4 years?
Well, it's actually a good point, though, because I know we have a lot of new residents here, a lot of visitors coming in. And so, yeah, I grew up in Chelan County, born and raised here in Chelan County, actually born in the Deaconess Hospital that is no longer the hospital up off of Okanagan Street. Lived in the Upper Valley, graduated high school in 1985 at Cascade School, and married to my wife, April. 35 years. We have 7 children, number 7 grandchild on the way. And so as we reflect back, 5 generations here in Chelan County, actually, pretty invested. But I moved out of the area, worked in the logging industry with my father-in-law's logging company for about 9 to 10 years, right out of high school. And started wanting to pursue law enforcement. Right after my father passed away from an illness in 1996, we moved back to Chelan County, and I started pursuing the profession of law enforcement. That was just really the interest that I had. At that point in time, I'm already almost 30 years old, right? And I got my 4th child on the way and looking at different ways how to do that. So I became a reserve deputy for Chelan County, went through their reserve deputy program. And then January of 1998, I actually got hired as a jail deputy. And I worked there just under 2 years. And I told them from the beginning my goal was to actually go to the field and actually be a patrol deputy. So I was able to get hired in November of '99 and started my what I call my dream job, and it really was. And part of my desire for doing that, Jefferson, was one is in the logging job that I had and working for the company, it paid the bills and we did really, really well. But there was a demand there, 6 days a week, especially when you're in management and just having a lot to do, and then raising a young family. I really wanted to have time to be involved with my family. I wanted to coach Little League Baseball and those type of things. So as I started that pursuit, and we were able to do that, and I've done a lot of different things for the Sheriff's Office, really the only agency that I've worked for in law enforcement. But a couple of the things I've done, I've been a couple years as a school resource officer for the Lake Chelan School District. I was a field training officer for multiple years. I was on the Chelan County Regional SWAT team for about 8 years. In 2004, I was promoted to patrol corporal. 2006, I was promoted to patrol sergeant. I was nominated and I received a Deputy of the Year award in 2004. And then I made that plunge to run for sheriff. And 2010, saw some things that I thought were lacking in leadership for the sheriff's office, and took that big step. And as I progressed into that and actually got elected, I had a friend that told me right after the election, he says, "Well, you got the tiger by the tail now, what are you going to do?" To be honest with you, that was a pretty profound statement, because I really didn't know what I didn't know. Even though I had been in leadership positions, there's so much more when you're not connected with middle management in the administrative side of a police agency that you just don't know. But the one thing that has made me successful, along with my team, is that I surrounded myself with very integral people. I would consider myself, I don't micromanage. If I have to get involved in micromanaging, then I'm probably going to want to find somebody else to take over that project, because I really like people that have the skills and abilities to do that. But one of the things I do is I want a team environment, and I want people to have the autonomy to do their job and run the sheriff's office and do that. And so as that, I built relationships with our county commissioners. I remember having a discussion with one of the county commissioners prior to being elected as I was running that campaign, and they told me, they said, "Hey, Brian, if you remember 3 things, I think you'll do really well. One is keep the citizens, number 1, and your staff, number 2, staff meaning our line staff, because I have my 5 appointed positions, and then keep you and your staff and the number 3 priority." At the same time as having that 30,000-foot view to always know that our citizens are number 1.
So between 2010, when you were elected first, and this election now, when you're seeking your 4th term, how do you think your philosophy on leadership has changed? Have you developed different ideas for how to best manage your people?
Yeah, I mean, you looking back, you second guess a lot of different things that you've done. I would say the first 24 months as sheriff in my first term it's saying that it was drinking from a fire hose is an understatement. It was very stressful trying to get our team set up in place. We had to make some different changes over the time. I mean, I brought in a chief civil deputy, and I knew that at the time she wasn't going to be a long-term person, but she had some amazing skills and was able to get us up and running financially and staff-wise, that we really had a good grasp of what was going on. So I give her a lot of credit for helping us do that from the beginning. And then as we did that, we had some changes in undersheriffs. I had an undersheriff that retired. We had some organizational changes. When I first came on in 2011, it was set up that it was didn't have the undersheriff structure. They had a chief of administration, and they had 3 lieutenants that were civil service protected and not appointed and at-will employees. And I wanted to surround myself with a team that was completely loyal to myself and our philosophy and vision. And so we went in and we bargained away those lieutenant positions and brought in our appointed chief positions. And that's when the ball, I feel, really started rolling. And we've had to make some changes over the course of time. Maybe it wasn't a really good fit for that person, but I can say this, Jefferson, without a shadow of a doubt, and this isn't degrading or down talking anybody else that's been in those leadership positions in the past, is I really feel like the team that we have in place now is the best that the sheriff's office ever seen. And I really focus my time on keeping and maintaining, building relationships within our outside of our agency. And when I say that, it means that could be interdepartments with the other elected officials, both in the county, to our other police agencies, and even around the state as we network and do different things as we run different programs.
Well, your agency has changed and adapted and grown in places over time. And the most recent example of growth that I can think of is the addition of the Behavioral Health Unit, which was established by the county and by vote of the commissioners is now a sheriff's subdivision. What do you see happening for that unit in the coming years? I feel like people understand that behavioral health is an issue that touches on law enforcement, touches on crime prevention, touches on just the safety and health of a community. So what do you see that unit adding to your toolkit, I guess?
It's been a huge thing, and you know, kind of touching based on what we were talking about earlier is when you surround yourself with people. All the staff that I've surrounded myself, I always look and say they're so much smarter than I am, and the things that they do well, they do so much better than I could in that. And obviously, we all have our great, our specific things that we're good at. But that behavioral health unit is really, we're actually building the plane as we're kind of learning how to fly it, so to speak. And what I mean by that is it happened so fast overnight. Really what happened is I had a chief patrol out of Musgrove come to me and said, hey, I think we have some concerns here with our current behavioral health diversion team, because we had brought on, we were working with Catholic Family Charities and our DCR, which is a designated crisis responder. And so we were designating what we call diversion deputies, behavioral health deputies, to go out and assigning them specific shifts to go out and work and locate and identify people that are in crisis for behavioral health needs so we can get them into the resources. And what that does is we have what I would call a nuisance calls. If you have somebody who's with a behavioral health issue and maybe that causes them to be homeless, or they're being a problem and a nuisance to a business or something, basically they'll cause a 911 call, they'll come in, our deputies will respond, and you'll move them along, and then next thing you know, you're getting another call because it's going here, but we're not getting them long-term solutions. So being able to get them into resources that eliminates tying up the criminal justice system, hopefully keeps them out of being criminally charged, but also gets them long-term solutions. And so with that program moving forward, it happened overnight. I mean, we went and presented it to the county commissioners and said, we think that we need to move this forward and bring this something to the county. They actually voted, did a motion and voted right there that day. I think that was about a year ago, September. And then by the first of the year, before the first of the year, we had our program manager up and running, which is Anna Johnson. And I just give her phenomenal credit. She has amazing vision, and as she shares that vision, we bought onto that and said, we're gonna go out and make this happen financially and logistically. And then our calls for service, contact numbers, went from 36 in January of 2022, and she just posted the numbers this morning. I saw them on a work email, that we hit I think it was 396 contacts in September. And that was just with 2. So we added a second person after the first of the year. Anna went out and helped us write a couple grants, received some money from the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs for wellness grants. And those wellness grants are specifically working for the aspect of trying to eliminate officer and first responder suicide. And so, in the past, when we're working with post-traumatic stress, you see this accumulation come up with officers that over the course of their career, they have so many critical incidents that they have this buildup. So what we want to do is help manage that stress level and have a program that's built to help them manage that along the way so they don't have any critical incidents themselves. And then after retirement, they're living healthy. But Anna has a real vision for both that and the behavioral health crisis needs on the street from our citizens. And so as we went and received those grants, we were able to expedite the regional concept, meaning we're going to hire a 3rd and 4th person. And so we just onboarded our 3rd and 4th employees for the behavioral health unit. And so those numbers that I just told you for September is actually without those 2 new employees. So the need is there, but with those 2 additional and adding to the 4th person is that we want to take this concept regionally. So now we're going to start serving all, obviously we serve Chelan County, but all of our local partners as well. So Douglas County and East Wenatchee. And I always tell people behavioral health crisis incidents, dangerous drugs and crime, they don't know and they don't accept boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries. They don't care that the Columbia River is there. So they're going to cross those boundaries. So as a team regionally, I think we're going to be more impactful in doing this job. So you're going to see that expand. And then we just got a vote from our commissioner's office here not too long ago to actually bring those employees completely under the policy and under the sheriff's hire. And so we're going to be bringing them on by the first of the year. And it'll be completely official. So pretty excited about that. And we've traveled around and looked at Spokane. We've looked at Redmond. Both Chief Musgrove and Anna Johnson have traveled to North Carolina and presented. And what we thought when we went back there to present at these behavioral health conferences, that we would probably find that we're way behind the bar, right? Maybe behind the standard. We actually found that we're actually way ahead of the average standard, which was encouraging. But at the same time, we're still looking out for agencies that are doing it right, forward thinking, and seeing how can we incorporate that here. And so we've been able to apply a lot of those tools that way.
Behavioral health and diversion, I think, has become an issue for a lot of departments. I feel like Chelan County and the departments here were a little bit ahead of that curve, as you mentioned. You were talking about things like this even before laws changed in 2020 to 2021 to encourage more diversion programs. I think people get concerned about how this interacts with what we call the overall crime rate. People talk about crime and maybe they have a picture of how bad it is or what percentage it represents. Talk about crime in Chelan County. Do we have an issue here, a problem here that needs to be tackled over the next 4 years?
Oh, there's increasing concern, and a lot of that comes from a variety. It's not one single thing that you can say this is the reason that we're facing these concerns. I mean, we've got the border crisis on our U.S.-Mexico border that opens that up, and we're seeing increased drug smuggling. We have some major numbers to basically support that. Legislative law changes, specifically in the 2021 session, that changed our drug enforcement. At the same time, there's some good laws that came out of Initiative 940 for de-escalation training, but it is expensive. But when we look at the increase in crime, and specifically, we're going to talk about the 2021 session. So we look at the pursuit, 5054. There was a couple other ones in Substitute House Bill Substitute House Bill 5051, and then 1054. But
these are pieces of legislation you've talked about in the past
that we've been out there, and it changes what you have to have. Do you have to have probable cause to make that stop, or to pursue that vehicle, or before we just had to have reasonable suspicion? So it's a big deal for that. But what we've seen is the criminals, the career criminals, they've been emboldened and empowered to saying, well, I know I have a better chance of getting away, and by the way, I don't have to stop. And when they put the blue lights on, I'm just going to take off because, one, they're probably on in criminal behavior and facing felony time, which means prison time. They might be affected by their mental state, might be affected by their drug use, so they're actually a little more brave in the things that they would do, risky behavior, dangerous behavior towards people. And so as we do that, one is we're going to have to really increase the work we're doing in our regional drug task force. And we've done that. We actually just kind of designed the makeup of that with our local agencies. And one of the things on that we had in the past, Jefferson, is being the lead agency since 2004, is that we had the majority of the staff there. So we potentially had the commander, which is a middle management position, one of our chiefs, and then you have the sergeant that's assigned to the drug task force, and then you would have detectives from each agency. Well, over the course of time, we had loss of funding, and we had agencies leave. East Wenatchee and Douglas County had left in the past and left us with lower numbers. So at the time, Sheriff Harum appointed other detectives to be there, because to do undercover, what we call UC drug work, you have to have a minimum of a 5-person team, because the sergeant, who is the supervisor, has to have the oversight and can't actually do the investigations. So they added a third person, and then we had an analyst as well. And so over the course of time, we were able to get East Wenatchee and Douglas County to come back. And then we had a concept. It was a brilliant concept that was actually brought on by East Wenatchee Police Chief Rick Johnson, who actually was my patrol chief for 4.5 years. Loved working with Rick, a great leader. But he had the concept of let's bring in the Wenatchee PROACT team, which is their street crime, gangs, drugs, and violence team. And let's incorporate and expand the mission and the vision of the Columbia River Drug Task Force. And so over a course of time and negotiation and talks, we were able to do that. And so we brought on their sergeant, their 2 PROACT team members, and we were able to remove one of our detectives and one of our sergeants for the Chelan County, and actually save us some money right now and distribute those funds and use those in other places for Chelan County. But now we have a 6-member team, and then we also partner with the Department of Corrections that comes in and does some part-time work, along with HSI, Homeland Security.
So is it now time to change the name of the Columbia River Drug Task Force, because the mission has expanded fairly significantly to include things like theft recovery and investigation of long-term criminal acts?
No, because really we discussed that, but it's really the main function still, but we're able to go in. So those extra team members are able to support the task force and the drug enforcement, because what we're really looking for is the higher level distribution of the drugs that's coming from the cartel in different places from outside of the country, and what's driving our serious drug addiction, dangerous drug addiction. And so super proud, because we actually transitioned that team at the beginning of 2022 in January, and we've never seen them doing a better job. They're a high-functioning, well-maintained team that's probably a little on the overworked side, but at the same time very proud, and our regional partners to allow that to happen.
I wanted to point out one thing on the subject of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs, is that there was a Washington Post story on October 4th that pointed out that most fentanyl is actually seized at border crossings, and often from U.S. citizens. So drug seizures at the border are actually quite significant right now. It doesn't account for the drugs that do make it into the country, but there are seizures happening at the border.
Yeah. And we did a border patrol visit.
You visited the border with Mexico?
A border visit, I should say.
In 2021.
In 2021 in April. And while we were down there in Pinal County, this is in Arizona, we were talking to Border Patrol agents. And we had flown with the Pinal County Sheriff's Office that has federal funding through Operation Stone Garden. And as we were interviewing and talking with their staff, we asked them, we said, about what's the average or the number that you believe is detected and or detained that's coming across the border illegally in Arizona? And they said their best estimated guess was that they would detect, because they have these radar systems, high-tech radar systems out in the deserts, that they would detect about 25 to 30% of the illegal people coming across the border. Of those detected, they all thought that they only detained another 25 to 30%. So as you were talking about the drugs that are being confiscated and caught on the border, there's just so much going on there. And at the time, the Pinal County Sheriff's Office, which serves a citizen population of about 500,000, said in 2018 they had 0 fentanyl M30 pill seizures. But in 2019, they saw that uptick to about 644 as the cartel was just starting to push this stuff up into America. And then in 2020, they hit over 200,000. I think it was around 224. So we were there in April of 21, and we asked them, what's your best guess of what you think you're going to hit? And they said, well, just based on what we've seen the last 2 years, that we're going to hit 500,000. Jefferson, they hit 1.2 million, excuse me, 1.2 million in 2020. 2021. And so in 2022, they're already on track to surpass that. But some of the things they're doing now is it's packaged differently. It may not be coated in a pill. Some of that powder, it's easier to get exposure. You're starting to hear the talk of the color coding and making it more appealing. Afraid that all of a sudden we're going to see not overdose deaths, but we're going to see what we call poisonings by fentanyl, which means somebody accidentally takes it, not knowing what it is, or it's a first-time user that has never used it before, and someone convinces them to take this, and it actually kills them the first time that they use.
And overdose deaths are a real issue in Chelan County and around the Wenatchee Valley. We're not immune to that. It's fair to talk about the border, but we are in, again, Chelan County. So here in Chelan County, the crime rate in 2021 per WASPIC, which you're the chair of the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, president this year, I believe is the title.
I'm the president of the Washington State Sheriff's Association.
I apologize.
I'm a past president of the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. The current president for WASPIC is actually Wenatchee Police Chief Steve Crown.
We're going to cut that part out of the interview because I just made a fool of myself.
Okay.
The crime rate in 2021, according to Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, was about 14.7 per 1,000 members of the Chelan County community, which was down about 34% from 2020. So if Chelan County is looking down the barrel of a crisis, of a storm, as you've called it, how do we explain this decline then that happened year over year between 2020 and 2021?
Yeah, I think you're going to find out as 2022 numbers and 2023 numbers will be much different. I think we're coming out of the COVID crisis. One is people were staying home and we weren't doing the enforcement. It wasn't the proactive enforcement for most of 2020 and then part of 2021 as well. And then we got hit with the legislative reform that we had from the Washington State legislation. And it changed the way that we would be arresting. So your drug crimes, obviously, because now we're going off of drug referrals for the most part until you have a prior to referrals, and then there was no system set up statewide in the beginning to even track those referrals. So, and we're seeing that from our rehabilitation places that the referrals, self-referrals are down as well. But what we're seeing from the homelessness and the overdoses and different things, I mean, you can take the numbers. The numbers I'm going to go off of are easy to go off of these two stats. Stolen vehicles in the state of Washington, prior to July of 2021, we were averaging about 2,000 stolen vehicles per month in the state of Washington. As soon as that reform went into place, and we're going to obtain this to mainly to the pursuit law changes, was that drastically upticked immediately and went to about 4,000 to 5,000 per month. And again, going to the part that those laws embolden the criminals. And in some ways, some people refer to it as like, let's allow the police to have the policing rights that they had so we can actually do what we need to do to enforce those laws. We never want to stop policing without compassion. We want to see our people get into rehab and get reform and make a productive life. Because when you talk to somebody that's been through drug addiction, dangerous, serious drug addiction, and they make it out, they will tell you it was like I was a prisoner in my own body, right? At the same time, it was a living hell, and it changed the way that their family looked at them. It changed all of their relationships, and so when they're able to get out of that, and all of a sudden they become productive, and they're able to go out and advocate for drug rehabilitation. It's a pretty powerful thing. So we want to use both of those things for drug enforcement on the law enforcement side of it. We want to be able to empower our police officers to go out and do a very good job aggressively, at the same time trying to get other resources to make a difference. So.
You've been vocal about the changes in legislation, and I think about the Blake decision by the Supreme Court. Now, that essentially says that a small amount of almost any drug remains legal for me to possess and carry in Washington State. But at one point, sheriffs aren't lawmakers. You can state your opinion, but you can't make the law. So at what point do we simply move forward and try to adapt to the law as it is now?
Well, I guess it's all what you want your community to be. And for us, it's about the quality of life. And we'll continue to talk about that because one is, as subject matter experts, your chiefs and your sheriffs, because they worked their careers up through law enforcement, and a lot of them have worked for the same agency, they know that. We get together and we dialogue through WASPIC, which is our policy advisor. We talk about and decide as a legislative committee the things that we want to move priority-wise forward. things that we want to support, the things that we want to come against and not support, and try to get legislation to not pass that. What I see huge numbers in support together is they're almost always on the same page. There's a few different ideas out there, but as far as you don't see much difference in that. And I want to bounce back to the numbers that we saw in the fentanyl death overdoses. In Chelan County in 2021, there was only 6 related fentanyl deaths in Chelan County. And I think we're at 22 or 25, most of those being fentanyl related, with a couple still pending toxology reports. That's a massive uptick, Jefferson, in what we're seeing. And we know that's to a combination of the influx of that fentanyl, that dangerous drug coming in from the southern border, to our policy changes here in Washington State and how we can enforce that and try to get a handle on it. Again, there's been some good things come from that as far as they're trying to work with a Navigator recovery program. But again, those are referral only, and I think that's a program that would be great to use in the future, but I think we need to put the powers back in the hand of our police professionals to be able to do that. But to answer your question, is at what point in time do we just move forward? I guess it's what are you willing to live with in the future? What are you willing to allow your children to have to be impacted by in the quality of life? And what the change I've seen in the last 23 to 24 years that I've been in law enforcement, I don't think is acceptable. And I think that we need to stand up and have a voice. And what happened was during the 2021 legislative session, specifically to that, is the sheriffs and the chiefs spoke up, and basically the legislators in control of the House and the Senate said, well, we really don't need you on this one, and we're going to move forward what we think is the best. And we said, please don't. We think these are the things that are going to happen, and tried to give them some influence there. And so I think it's our job, and not just our job, I think it's our duty to stand up and hold those legislators accountable and say, hey, let's work together in the future. I don't want to just badmouth you and try to make you feel bad about it. I want to hold you accountable, and I want to say, let's do something to change that. Let's not just leave it the way it is. Let's reverse some things. Let's do what we need to make better policy, because it's really about policy and how we can enforce the laws and move forward.
And you and other sheriffs did give testimony on those bills as they were going through. You stated your opinion. Some of those laws, as they went through drafts, did change and did soften in a way to give back some of the tools that police perceive themselves as losing.
Yeah, we're very thankful that they didn't get passed the way they were originally written, and we thought it would have been really an extreme case, but we were still fairly disappointed with some of the law changes.
The way you've described the potential for future crime and disruption, Brian, has been the coming storm. That's been a title of one of your campaign videos that wrapped up things like drug trafficking, behavioral health, and the legislation that we just discussed. The storm is coming is a statement you've made in campaign videos and appearances. It's also a statement that's associated with the QAnon movement, which is a complex of far-right conspiracy theories that promote the ideas that liberal elites are preying on children to maintain their power. Did you seek to appeal to people, to voters who might hold that belief system when you put together that campaign strategy?
Absolutely not. I think it's laughable because I don't follow the QAnon. I hadn't even heard of it until just in the last year or so. And somebody put out an article accusing me of some different things, and I actually had to Google it to see what it even was. I wasn't even familiar with it. Really, the storm, that analogy it's that of a storm. I mean, what we just saw happen in Florida is, as a hurricane is building, in the southern regions, and it's moving forward to the mainlands, is you have to say, you're tracking it, you're trying to see what's happening, what's going to be the impact when it hits shore. And I look at that as the impact of the influx of dangerous drugs, fentanyl, coming up from the southern borders. What is it we're really going to see? We truly didn't know the real numbers. Remember, we talked about detection versus detention, and then what we have as far as actually seizing and taking these dangerous drugs off the street. And so what we knew, what was happening in Pinal County, Arizona, is that there was this massive uptick, and they were seeing these numbers go, and they were starting to see the overdose deaths and different things. We hadn't seen the numbers here. We were just starting to see the evidence of fentanyl coming into our communities. But here, just in the last fall, we saw big seizures. Wenatchee PD in November had a 1,500 pill seizure, and then in January, the task force had one, and then we had a 10,000 pill seizure. And then we started seeing the the emergency service calls where they were having homeless camp and they'd have 7 fentanyl related overdose in a weekend, and the numbers were increasing. And I started talking with the coroner and tracking and to see what was happening. That storm that we're talking about is, we know it's coming, we just don't know what the strength of it is. We don't know if it's going to be a category 2, 3, 4. But we do know that this is a massive uptick, and with the legislative changes, it's changed, and we believe that's what I call the perfect storm. Is there's all of these different factors that have impacted it in a negative way to the way we police and/or the way that we're able to stop crime. And so that's really what it was all about. It was just like waiting to see we don't want to wait to see what happens with the storm. We want to prepare for it. We want to, board up our windows, and we want to take refuge. But in this case, there's things we can do to divert the storm. Obviously, a hurricane, you can get out there and stand, all it's going to do is blow you out of the way, right? But in this, there's things that we can do as a community, as law enforcement agencies, as legislators, whether that's in the city, municipalities, or on the county level, or on a state level, and then federal level, that we can do to make it better. And that's really what we're talking about, is just trying to educate people and say, hey, we need you to be our voice as well, and we need you to stand with us to make some decisions and help influence people in the future to protect our quality of life.
So for you, it was a useful metaphor.
Just
unrelated
yeah,
to
I had no idea actually until you said that there that was something they do. I don't follow those guys.
Let's talk about staffing and personnel in the sheriff's office. Different numbers. Your opponent has said 46 people. You may have a different number as far as the number of people who have left over the past course of time, maybe 8 to 12 years. And the sheriff's office as a whole, I think, is about 75 to 80 people, including 54 to 60 deputies at a given time. So is the turnover in your office something of concern for you? Do you see ways to address it in the future?
Well, when I first heard that number from my opponent in one of the forums that I think we did early on up in Manson, I laughed and I said, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because attrition-wise, we always said that, we've seen over my course of the last 11 and a half, 12 years, is we're going to see 4 to 5 people leave our agency attrition-wise. So you have retirement, you have some people that leave the job early to go to other industries for various reasons. And when I heard that, I knew that numbers that he was sporting wasn't accurate. So he was trying to twist the facts on why people are leaving, and I actually went back to my staff and had them pull all the numbers up, because I've hired over 74 people in my 12 years. So if only 46, Jefferson, have left, shouldn't our staff have grown? We haven't grown our staff but maybe 5 or 6 positions in the last 12 years. And a lot of those positions has come because we created a traffic enforcement unit. We took over code enforcement that we just did the last couple of years with 3 positions. Now our behavioral health team with 4. We took on school resource officers. We got contracts with 4 different schools, and we're getting ready to add to that program with Lake Chelan and the Manson going to a larger quantity. Instead of sharing an FTE, they're actually going to go to their full-time FTE next school year. So a lot of different things like that we've done. So we went from 53 commissioned in 2011 to, we were actually up to 61 this last year, and we've added some new things. We added a training sergeant position because of all the mandate trainings, and we really emphasized a lot on our training in the sheriff's office to put money towards the training and the equipment, because we want our people to be excellent, not just mediocre. But no, the numbers don't support that, and I think the total numbers for leaving, and actually, because I have the paper, I wanted to be accurate on that, we're showing that we've had about 56 people leave. And then we break it down from how many retired, 32 overall, when you look at commissioned or non-commissioned staff. And you had an X amount, 3 that resigned, and 8 failed their FTO, which is their field training portion, as they didn't cut the grade. They weren't going to qualify to make our standards, so we had to release those people before their probation was over. I've only terminated 2 employees, and I've hired 74. I don't look at that to be excessive. You show me any private business that has done those numbers, I would say that we've done a great job to try to maintain and retain our employees. I've also had staff that have went to other agencies in leadership positions. Rick Johnson was a sergeant from Wenatchee PD that I recruited to come over and be part of my command staff, and was our chief of patrol for 4.5 years, and amazing leader, and I saw it in him, and he told me when the time came that he wanted to go over and put his name in and test for that chief of police position, and I actually put a reference letter in to support that, because remember, we're talking a regional concept here, that I knew that he would be good for our region and our valley. We have another deputy that was a corporal that is a chief for another small agency. We've seen other people retire and go and work as investigators for state agencies and different things like that. And then people just go out, and we've seen them start their own personal businesses. So I think the attrition rate is spot on for what you would normally see.
And in a wider context, I think law enforcement in the last 2 to 5 years, maybe, I won't say it's become competitive, but it's become a place where turnover does happen. And people are recruited to different agencies. They might have a better cost of living someplace else. They might come from Seattle to Chelan County. They might go from Chelan County to another county. So there's been turnover in that industry, not just locally.
Yeah, and we network around the state. We know what's going on there. The trend is across the state, across the nation. It's challenging, the recruiting, and you said it right. We do compete. We compete here locally, and we meet monthly with our local regional partners, the sheriffs and the chiefs and all their command staff. We get together and we troubleshoot and roundtable over different things. And we're always, hey, where are you at in staffing? Where are you doing? Even the jail, for instance, they run about the same amount of staff that we would, and they were down 8 positions earlier this year. But what you see, it's cyclic. It comes to every agency in a wave, in some sense. And we were down 6 positions earlier in the year. We cut that down to 2, and I have a sergeant retiring in November. But I also have another lateral that's from Arizona that's coming on board here the 1st of November. And then we'll be trying to fill those other positions. So it's one of those things that anytime if we're only down 2 or 3 positions at any given time, we'd probably be pretty happy. The difference between a lateral hire, and for our viewers, is that's somebody that's already a commissioned law enforcement officer working for another agency, whether that's in Washington State or in another state. They're able to come on, and we're able to train them much quicker in about 14 weeks. But if you come in as an entry level, brand new, never been in law enforcement before, we have an extensive, rigorous training program that you're going to do X amount of hours prior to going to the basic law enforcement academy. And that competitive, work pool there, those applicants, if you don't get them right away, they'll go to another agency. So what we've had to adjust, we start hiring them earlier now. Before we would just hire them a couple weeks before their basic law enforcement academy start time. We just hired 2 entry levels September 6th. And they don't go to the academy. Originally, it was going to be January, but we didn't want to lose them because they were such qualified candidates. We were able to bump their basic law enforcement academy date down to November. But they're going to get a vast experience of working in evidence and helping detectives and a lot of different things and a lot of really pre-training for their academy. We're just seeing some really good stuff, and we're still appealing to a lot of outside agencies that here in Washington State, and it's because of the quality life that we have in Chelan County. It's not just about a nice agency to work with, and the Chelan County Sheriff's Office does offer a lot of specialty team positions that some smaller agencies or city departments wouldn't offer. So that's an attraction for them, but it's really the quality of life here in North Central Washington that they're looking for. And they're ready to make a change, and they want to raise their families here where we offer something that the rest of the state doesn't.
Well, Brian, there's been reporting on internal surveys in the Sheriff's Office that where some of the responses were highly critical of the way the administration handled individual officers' cases, instances of harassment, abusive language, even allegations of career sabotage between deputies, and not just deputies, but supervisors toward deputies. So how seriously do you take these issues, and how do you cure them if you're reelected?
That is the million-dollar question. And first of all, what I want our viewers to know is that culture survey was actually implemented by myself and my command staff several years back. And they put that in. At the time, we had, which 2 of our chiefs now were sergeants at the time. When they promoted up out of that, they removed themselves from that culture survey team. But basically, they put out the survey monkey type of thing, get the results, get the questions, and then they put a culture survey team together so they could get the theme of the top things that where it say, hey, what are the problems, what are the issues that people believe or identifying, so we can identify those, because we don't know. And I always tell people like this: when I worked as a patrol deputy, working out in Leavenworth, Kashmir, whether it was a patrol corporal or sergeant or just a line deputy for 8 to 10 years, I knew the things that were going on. I saw that the, tools and equipment that we're using, or things that were falling short, or things that we could identify that we might need. I knew that. But as the sheriff and as a command staff, you're farther removed, and so you have to rely on your reports, the supervisor report to those chiefs, to pass that information along, because we're not working the street and doing those things. And then we take what we believe is the right thing to go back and support them in the finances to get the tools and equipment they need. And then addressing sometimes, because, hey, let's face it, we're dealing with people, and sometimes, things come up with personalities and relationships, and so trying to manage those, that we're treating each other fairly and respectfully is important. So we identified that, but I want to tell our viewers some of the numbers here, and I'm going to read it so I don't get them wrong. But when they did the culture survey, 76% we really believe that support the direction that I'm taking the team, and that our team is supporting. But they had 53 commission staff at the time, and at the time the survey was taken, only 37 of those staff participated in the survey. And when analyzing the responses to all 19 questions on the survey, on average, only 13 of the 37 staff responded negatively to any question. So when you look at those type of things, they said, one, it was important to us. We are the one that created and implemented it, and we wanted to hear from our people. And then we put a team together that are the staff themselves to say, let's identify what are the top pieces here that we need to go after, prioritize them, and we can start getting plucking away on those one by one. And let's get the easy ones off. Let's identify the hard ones. Let's go with that. And so we've been in a position and a mindset that we want to do everything we can. But sometimes those are just indifferences between people and at the line level themselves. And we put that back on the supervisors, because we have always wanted to be, and we're right at the forefront now because we have some amazing supervisors running our agency, that we are what we call a sergeant-led agency, giving our supervisors more autonomy, making sure they're trained and they're confident to do those things. And they represent our agency well, and I think we're moving very strongly toward that. And what I've seen my opponent do is they're trying to nitpick apart some of the things. It could be as simple as hey, like there was a riff that somebody says, our West Detachment substation in Leavenworth didn't have some of the tools and office equipment that they had up in Chelan. Well, I'm not there every day, so unless somebody brings that forward, and then so making sure that, okay, we're going to connect the dots. Maybe we had it in the past where we had a supervisor that was in charge of that, was bringing that information. They were the sole responsibility person for that, and then somehow that got lost. My point being is, unless we have that information, we'll never know. And then we always say that the information, because myself as sheriff, is one of the biggest lessons I've learned is communication. Leadership, they're always going to tell you that in your training. You can't over-communicate, but make sure it's important and necessary. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons. You think you're communicating, but is the message that you're portraying, are they receiving that? And maybe you're following up to say, here's the message I'm saying. And we know this with when if you're married and you have children, you think you told your kids how to do this little chore that you want them to do, and it turns around and they do something completely different. And then you have to go back and reflect and go, did I give clear and concise directions? Was the message received? And so we're always looking back, how can we deliver that message? Are our supervisors taking that mission and vision from the top administration and pushing it down? Is there buy-in? Is there ownership? And all the kinds of different things that we're doing. And I actually think we're doing a really good job, but there have been things that we've struggled with in the past, but as we identify them, we try to correct them and move forward.
Will you do an internal survey like this again? And do you think you've corrected from this one enough so that positivity rates will go up?
Oh, absolutely, I do. Yeah, and I think it's something, importantly, because those issues are going to be either corrected or go away, and then new issues potentially, and the change of the times, of all of the environmental changes that we have coming our way, is going to be important to keep a pulse on what we're doing.
You mentioned the 2 times that you've found it necessary, in your view, to dismiss a deputy. Deputy Jennifer Tyler and Sergeant Mike Harris were those 2. Both of those individuals came back with federal lawsuits related to their dismissal, or related to their reinstatement after they were brought back on the force by arbitration. By my count, Brian, the county or its insurance pools had to pay about $1.82 million, 1.82 in those 2 cases. What did you learn from those outcomes, from going through those processes? You were in trial with Jennifer Tyler. You were in lengthy arbitration with Sergeant Harris. What did you learn from those outcomes about how to manage your deputies, how to deal with those situations?
A lot of that comes at the supervisor level. Have we prepared our supervisors to train documentation? One of the things that I communicated early on as a sheriff, I went in and met with our supervisors, and what we saw, there was a lack of documentation in the past, and I'm talking multiple years back, is that documentation, because a lot of people will get their feelings hurt, bent out of shape, if they get their annual review, and they get on there and they says, oh, Deputy so-and-so, you could use some improvement here, because we all want to be strived at saying, I'm the best that I can be, but let's face it, the sheriff all the way down, there's things that we can improve at, and we need to be able to take that feedback. And so as we look at ways to improve, we've had people that would push back on that. And so I went in and communicated to the supervisor, said, listen, take the little things for the team, because without the documentation, when the big things come up, because it's called progressive discipline, you've got to show to the courts, to the arbitrator, that you did progressive discipline when you get into termination, or even potentially days off without pay, right? Those are some of the more serious potential disciplinary actions. And so, and I'm saying, let's document the little things, be willing to take the feedback and learn and grow from that. Because if we don't document the little things, and you fight that in a hearing every time that somebody sits down and writes your annual review board and says you need to improve on this, then how are we going to set ourselves up for success in the future? Because there's no documentation for progressive discipline. And so, and I also need to remind the viewers that, Jennifer Tyler was terminated twice, once by myself, but once previously by the previous sheriff. And so, and that had happened just prior to the election in the fall of 2010. I came in, their findings were sustained, and there were multiple sustained findings for untruthfulness, and it resulted in her termination by Sheriff Harum. But she didn't get reinstated until 30 months later. And so the arbitrator found, I believe, the findings to be sustained on those. Instead of going with progressive termination, he instated 5 days without pay. So we had to come up with a plan to reinstate her. And so I went to the sheriffs and chiefs and my peers and said, hey, what do you do in this situation? I've never experienced this. I haven't talked to anybody that's had anybody out this long. And they just said, whatever your training program is for a new person, because they've been gone longer than 24 months, you need to do that, one, for the safety and the liability of that employee that's coming back, and for the safety and the liability of the citizens that we serve, and the liability for the Chelan County. So we put together a rigorous training plan, because we had increased our training for new employees from Sheriff Harum to my administration. For if we had a lateral employee coming on, in the past, they might only do 4 to 6 weeks of FTO period. But we increased that to everybody's going to do a 12. And then we've even increased that even more since then, because now we do 2 weeks of pre-FTO for our entry level and our lateral candidates. So we wanted to really make them successful. And so that's where the real argument came back for the lawsuit that the civil lawsuit that was granted in her ward, so to speak. But in that process is the sheriff, and nobody singular or a small team goes out there to make these decisions. You have the fact finders that come in, whether that's an inside investigative team or an outside investigative team. And then you have to meet the elements of just cause. It goes to the undersheriff for administrative insight. Once those policy violations are identified and he does his review on that, the recommendation would come up to me. But through that whole process, you have human resources. You have the county administrator that we counsel with. We have the county attorney, legal advisor, and sometimes we go to Washington State County risk pool attorneys, and we get their advice on things. And then if it goes through the grievance process, through the collective bargaining agreement, that person has the right to appeal that to the sheriff, which is our step 1 grievance process, then up to the county board of commissioners is a step 2. And all of those things were sustained the way, but through legal advice all the way through. And so knowing that we believe we're doing the right thing to serve our citizens, to protect them and keep them from serious policy violations.
But let's be clear, the Douglas County jury did find that in favor of Deputy Tyler and that she was a victim of retaliation. And
Yeah.
that was the basis for their...
And looking back on that, we went back and tried to figure out why, because we were very confident that we were in the right on that. We still believe we were in the right on that. But we had a supervisor that actually had cut Jennifer Tyler out of some emails, and it wasn't to our knowledge until a later date. That employee actually ended up being coach and counsel disciplined through that, but we think that played a big part on the discriminatory part of that as well. So
We can talk about crime and things like that all day, but your office does a lot more. Search and rescue comes to mind.
Oh man,
Very crucial in this landscape. Marine patrol, also crucial in this landscape. Search teams have done a lot of work this year alone, getting people out of the backcountry, helping people who've been hurt or even killed. Marine teams and people who are trained in swiftwater rescue also. We've had, I think, 6 drowning deaths in our natural waterways, some in Lake Chelan, but a lot of them where you grew up, in the Leavenworth Bend of
Yes.
the Wenatchee River. People are always thinking and fretting about the upcoming tourist season around Leavenworth. How many people are we going to lose in the river this year? What kind of steps can the sheriff's office take to try and make that a safer experience for people? There's not a way to throw a net across the river. So what kind of proactive
No.
steps could you take?
no, boy, in Jefferson, this is one that's really impactful. As a patrol deputy in the past, I've been on multiple drownings in the Icicle and Wenatchee River, mainly the Wenatchee River. People generally out of the area, they underestimate the power of whitewater. They see a nice flowing, relaxing stretch of water, not knowing the danger just downstream. But the biggest thing is getting information out and education, so people to know. Well, personal flotation devices. Come on, people, we got to wear our life jackets. I'm a huge fan of that. I've done multiple week-long trips, kayaking trips with a son and with a daughter. And we take all the safety precautions, one, being trained right, making sure we have all the safety equipment. But even with that safety equipment, things can go bad because the power of the whitewater can actually strip and rip in the wrong situation. So recently, just this year, we had a group that came together, and we've been part of that through emergency management, is how do we educate the public? Signage on the river. Leavenworth is dealing with some things where they're actually putting because they have a lot of inner tuber floaters, and it's short, shallow water, and then all of a sudden they get into a stretch. If they don't get out in time, somebody can get into a white water rapid area, and that's where we've seen several of our drownings happen this year. And so that group has got together, and that's all of our first responders from fire, EMS, to the Chamber of Commerce, Forest Service, DNR, the Sheriff's Office, and coming up with, and I know I'm missing some partners there with the cities as well, but coming up with different ways and the funding to put signage up, danger areas, and getting messaging out there as far as pamphlets and social media type of stuff, and just trying to educate people the best we can. But the flotation device, and I'd like to see some stuff incorporated in our schools to give them some water safety training as well. Is that because a lot of our young kids may go out, but it's not subject just to young kids. It's all different ages. We do a lot of different things on our marine patrol, that we actually get out to our rental companies when they're using those vessels and stuff. It's something that they're supposedly required to check off that they've read prior to renting that vessel, all of the safety things. We do marine patrol inspections as we inspect their vessels to make sure they have all of their safety equipment available to meet the maximum capacity for their vessels. And it's just on and on and on. And then obviously when you get into motorized or even just basic waterway, even if you're not on a motorized vessel, is intoxication and food consumption. We've seen people that are just going to swim across this area, and they'd been drinking and ate a lot, and then they get out and something happens and they're not able to function properly, and their body seizes on them, or whatever that is. But just a heartache for us to have to go back and do the rescues and deal with the families and see the hurt that comes from that.
Brian, back in mid-September, you and your wife attended the Reawaken America tour in Post Falls, Idaho. Your campaign posted about this on your Facebook page. This is a large touring event. People who were associated with former President Trump, like Mike Lindell, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, appear at these. it promotes a kind of Christian politics for America. And it's also heavily tied in with the false claim, I want to be clear that it's a false claim, that the 2020 presidential election was unlawful. Do you believe that Joe Biden is the lawfully elected president of the United States?
I don't think it matters what I believe, Jefferson. I think we have a process in place until somebody can come in and prove that. I don't have the evidence to do that. I've seen documentaries and asked people email me stuff all the time as the sheriff to say, hey, can you watch this? I've watched the 20,000 Mules to say that there is some major concern in voter integrity, and I think we need to put those things in place. But I don't think I have the knowledge or the ability to say whether or not Joe Biden's not the lawfully elected president. Because
Well, it's a question of your belief, though.
I think there's some serious integrity issues, and I don't know what that vote count is. And I know that there's some things in place that would question to say we need to do some things in the future to make sure that there's voter integrity, so we never have to question this in the first place. But you started talking about that, us attending that, and how that came about. I was actually attending an event on Saturday, the day after that, in Hayden, Idaho, for the End of the Watch Ride. And the End of the Watch Ride is something they do across America. They do about 21,000 miles. And I'm missing the organization's
For
group
fallen
that does
service
it.
members. and
Yeah, so
officers.
all of the first responders across the nation that died in the line of duty, which is major. So they take this nice big fifth wheel trailer and they put their memorial photo on there, and they're going to take motorcycles that are dedicated to a handful of these fallen officers, and they sponsor that fallen officer on the Harley Davidson, and they tour to every agency that had lost that around the nation. And it takes them several months, and it was their main fundraiser for that. And in 2021, they actually had sponsored our fallen hero, Deputy Saul Gallegos, who was shot and killed in the line of duty in 2003 here. And so we knew that they were doing a fundraiser. We wanted to go over there and attend that with the End of the Watch. And I had somebody reach out to me and said, hey, there's this group over here that's doing this. And we looked at the list. I really didn't know what the Reawaken
America tour.
We weren't familiar with that. I went online. There was a person that my wife was interested in hearing speak that we thought was on the list was Charlie Kirk. And then I was interested in actually hearing General Flynn speak. We went over, ended up going for the afternoon. Didn't get to hear either one of them. Charlie Kirk wasn't there. I think we showed up about 3:30. We stayed till about 7, and we have some friends that live in Post Falls that used to live here in town. We went over and spent the evening with them, and then we went and attended the event in Hayden. So it was really pretty uneventful. But did a live interview with the prior Representative Matt Shea from Patriot Radio, and just talking about the legislative changes. And for me, and people would say, because for me, that's why I went to the border. I like to see what the facts are. I like to see what people represent. But we only stayed for a couple hours.
Brian, Matt Shea, who you bring up, is a former state representative from Spokane Valley, a Republican who was censured by his colleagues and found by the State House of Representatives to have, quote, participated in an act of domestic terrorism. He offered to perform surveillance on what were deemed to be left-wing or liberal groups that might be doing protest movements in the Spokane area. He was coordinating with people known to be potentially violent right-wing activists. So I guess my question, Brian, is why do an interview, even if it's on a subject dear to your heart, with a person of that caliber?
Somebody had introduced me to Matt while we were there and said, hey, he's interested in interviewing you because I'm the Washington State Sheriff's Association president. And we chatted a little bit. He said, hey, what do you think about this? We were talking about the legislative reform and the different things that were coming out and some of the challenges we were facing. He said, would you be interested in doing an interview on those topics? And I said, absolutely. I'd love to get my message out. So it wasn't about who I'm doing the interview with. It's about what the message I'm getting out. And so anything I can do, because as we were talking earlier in this interview, said, well, don't you think it's just time to move on? No, I think it's time to tell people the truth of what I do. And I'm going to continue to beat that drum on legislative reform and where we need to try to recover from that in the future. So the audience that I can get to listen to me, and I'll get an interpreter and talk on the Spanish radio station if we can get that message out. I'm not a Matt Shea follower. I just know that he was a previous state representative, and he
You were aware of his background when you sat down for the interview?
Slightly. I knew there was some things in his background that had been challenged, but I really hadn't followed him. I didn't know detailed what they were.
You mentioned that you're interested in seeing Michael Flynn at the Reawaken America event, if you could, but you didn't. If you follow General Flynn, you know that he's an election denier of some repute. I guess I have to circle back to that question again, Brian. As someone who, consumes media that involves General Flynn, what are your beliefs concerning the 2020 election? So many audits and so many recounts and so many lawsuits have found no evidence that.
I think I already answered that question. Like I said, I don't have the ability to do that. There's major concern for election integrity, and I think that we want to put everything in our place as sheriffs. I've had people email me information saying, hey, you need to investigate this. I don't believe that we have voter fraud, and I think there's voter fraud abroad. I don't think that we have an election integrity issue here in Chelan County, and I don't have the ability to know firsthand what that is across the nation. But I do believe that there are things that need to be held accountable and said, what's the level of that? I have no idea.
So you believe that the Chelan County election process is fair and lawful?
I do. I've known Skip Moore for a long time, and I think he's to be a very integral person that puts every bit of his effort in there. Obviously, the big conspiracy is with the Dominion voter machines, electronics, and we all know that things can be hacked, is we want to know, right, if when my vote goes in and I mark this box, is it counted properly and accurately? And I think everybody wants to know that that's counted for. And so I would support voter integrity, but again, I'm not the one that should be saying yes or no on what the legalities of the national vote is.
Well, I think your voters would be interested to know what you believe on that subject, though, don't you think?
I think I just reported it. Thank you.
So in May 2020, Brian, you submitted a declaration in the lawsuit to overturn Governor Inslee's emergency orders surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. You and I talked about this at the time. You said in your declaration, quote, I do not believe Chelan and or Douglas counties are in an emergency situation, specifically in regards to COVID-19. You also helped to gather some written statements from others for use in that lawsuit. At that time, in May 2020, 6 people in Chelan County had died of COVID-19. A year later, that number was 66 people, and today the number is 184 people in Chelan County have died of COVID-19. 3 of those in just the last month, so we know it's still with us. How do you feel in retrospect about having signed on to that effort, having seen now how serious the pandemic became for the Wenatchee Valley?
Well, the specific part that we're talking about there is the emergency declaration. Was in the emergency declaration, they were talking about the impact that it was going to have to our health facilities. Remember, they set up the emergency field hospitals and stuff, and we didn't see the impact to those. That's specifically what we were talking to about. As far as we're not trying to claim that there wasn't an issue as far as a health concern. That's not what I was trying to indicate at all. What we're trying to say is the emergency that they were claiming and for the emergency declaration didn't fit when we got into months later. Because remember, this was going to be a 2-week shutdown, and then it was something we extended and extended and extended. So as we looked at that, that was the concern was wait, the declaration doesn't fit on what the original one was. And so we're saying that emergency didn't exist in the way that they had described it. That's really what my letter was about.
Would you have done things differently, though, seeing how things panned out since then?
No, I don't think so. No. I mean, my concern, I know people that have died from the COVID. I know personal friends that have lost loved ones, and I know the heartache, and my condolences go out to them. No, I think, again, and I sat in on weekly calls with what they call MAC. It's a multi-agency coordination group through the health department through the COVID, and they invited the elected officials, specifically to myself and Douglas County Sheriff Morris, and we would do these Zoom calls generally at 4:30, 5 o'clock every Tuesday afternoon, and they would give updates, and they would once in a while ask our opinions on some different things, and there was a big push for enforcement on masking and different things like that, and as local law enforcement leaders, we put out a group letter between myself and Sheriff Morris and our 2 chiefs here locally that we said that this wasn't a public safety issue. This was a health department issue, and that we would not be participating in that, that we would always be there to make sure that we're maintaining safety for people and making sure the laws, they weren't being violated on their laws, and their constitutional rights were protected, but we weren't going to be going out and, I guess, the cliche of being the mass police, that just was not what our intentions and we were going to be. And we did that as a local leadership group, and I think you also saw that in compilation around the state and enforced
You had
solidarity.
things to take care of that didn't involve mask requirements or social distancing
Correct,
requirements. You had to look at the
yeah.
larger law enforcement picture.
We asked, and we got into some discussions with our local contract cities, specifically in Leavenworth, that wanted our officers masking outside on patrol. And I said, we offer and we supply all of our members with PPEs. I said, but when it comes into officer safety and de-escalation tactics, that's going to have to be up to them as officer discretion on whether or not they were going to wear those. And even going into a call, if they were going into a 911 call, they had to keep the masking and the PPEs in consideration, whether that was beneficial or a negative towards their enforcement and officer safety and even communications. And I said, but here's the difference. If they're going in and it's not a call and they're going in for lunch or a break or something like that, that we said you need to honor the businesses and do appropriately there.
I've got one more question for you, Brian, and I appreciate all the time you've given me today. In 2010, when you ran the first time, you were vice president of the Chelan County Deputy Sheriff's Association. Now you're in a position to be challenged by the person who's president of that Deputies Association. A little bit ironic there. You succeeded, I think, in large part with the support of many deputies in taking over this role. Where do you think most of your line deputies are now in terms of whom they support for sheriff?
Well, I guess if I had to go down and check off a list from the knowledge that I have, I would say it's probably 2 to 1. I think that I have a 60 to 70% following and approval rating. We have 10 sergeants. I have 8 of them on my website as full endorsements. I'm expecting, well, obviously I know that the numbers exist, so the supervisors group in itself will give me their endorsement. And the local law enforcement leaders here that we've built relationships with. And this is one of the things I would ask my viewers to do is there's a lot of rumors out there on half-truths and what we call lies and twisting the truths and making numbers say what you want them to say from my opponent. But go onto our webpage, burnettforsheriff.com, or go onto our Facebook page and what we call our candid video series. And you hear me, myself, in a series of 4 short videos, but there's real life testimonies from people that work with me and around me that can tell you their truthfulness. And it's leaders that are leading our areas, regional leaders. And look at our endorsement list. It's, I've got all the law enforcement leaders here because we work collaboratively well together. We've got the best thing going in a leadership capacity from all of our agencies than ever before. And I had great relationships with like Chief Tom Robbins before, and Sheriff Harvey Jesdahl, and the other chief from Eastern Wenatchee, Randy Harrison. But collectively, there's something very special about this group and how we sacrificially work together, not just to think about our own agency. We've done a ton of training this last year when Chief Johnson went over to East Wenatchee. And he was not in a position because our agency had been denied training for such a long time. And he wanted to get that into a training standard that was similar to what the Chelan County Sheriff's Office is offering and doing. But we offered their in-service training. We've trained their staff for the last 2 years, and we're not taking payment on that. We're doing what is right for this valley. At the same time, it's a cost to Chelan County, but we know it's the right thing to do as we model that regional training, and then they get their staff up. We're going to have the best regional training model in the state if we don't already have now. But to go back to your original question, I think I have tremendous support. But we know the 80-20 rule, right? Everybody's heard of the 80-20 rule. Is you have a significant low number of people that have been held accountable. And in those numbers, when somebody's held accountable and we're saying, hey, you violated, you did some things wrong, we'd like you to grow here, you have an option. You have an option to take that feedback and grow from it and be positive with it, or you can let it fester and become negative, and you become, unfortunately, what we call a disgruntled employee, or a negative impacting one that goes out and talks negatively and brings that negative talk spreads. It's a cancer and it's infectious. And we don't agree with it. We don't like to hear it. We don't like to see it, and we do everything that we can to stop that. But that's, unfortunately, we don't have a full automatic control over that. And there's some people who have not responded effectively. And we're not going to let that hold back our agency. We have an amazing amount of group of people that are positive, and we're going to move forward and do the best we can for the citizens we serve.
Brian, anything you can think of that I didn't ask about that you think voters should know?
No, that'll probably be right after I leave and get in my truck and drive away. But no, I just want to thank our viewers. North Central Washington and Chelan County, we have the best citizens ever. We do. Jefferson, when we saw the things happen nationally, right, the George Floyd thing and police reform and all of that talk, and you saw some demonstrations and stuff, and we went out and did community town hall educational, so people would know what that legislative reform looked like. I've never seen such best support, even during COVID and during those times, was people here wave at you. I mean, as we take on lateral employees, we've hired people from King County, Kent PD, Monroe, Marysville, Tukwila, and many other agencies. Those people come here and from different environments over there, and they're like, man, I can't believe the support. People, as a law enforcement officer, they didn't want to take their car home and have it visible outside. They're afraid that somebody might do something to their home. But here, your residents, your neighbors, they want it there. Hey, that increases safety. It'll make our cars slow down. And it's just such great support. And I just can't say enough to say thank you for the support that you give to our employees and our first responders, our law enforcement officers. And again, I just want to remind the listeners that you have a current Sheriff's Office administrative team that is well known, respected in their leadership, have built amazing relationships. They're good leaders, they're effective, and they're getting the job done. We're getting the job done, and we're excited about serving you for another 4 years.
Sheriff Brian Burnett, three-term sheriff of Chelan County, running as a Republican for a fourth term. Thanks a lot for coming in.
Thank you, Jefferson.
You're watching the NCWLIFE channel.